Okay, I'll just check the questions again. Have there been any new ones? If anyone has a question they want to ask me directly now before we get started, just let me know, or anything in the chat box. Well, there's one on here. I'd like to hear the answer to the question if a negative experience. I'm reading this as you're writing it. Hello. Let me get my questions up on here. I don't think I'm sharing my screen, am I? So last week, we talked about whether or not you should talk about your negative experiences. And my answer to that question was, unfortunately, it depends on the negative experience, right? You're totally allowed to talk about your personal attachment to a subject. So if it was a negative experience that spurred your interest in something, especially if it's in the health sector, you can mention that. You don't need to make it the center of your entire story. Like I mentioned American applications. If any of you have applied to university in America, they love a personal anecdote. They love especially like a sad, inspirational story. UK universities, they don't need that. They'd rather know that you are capable, that you're clever, that you are hardworking. That's more important than showing that you have like a painful, inspirational story. You can include it though, if it's your genuine motivation. So that if it's that negative experience, then that could really work, especially for question 1. The only reason I'd say not to include a negative experience is if it's any kind of conflict. It might make, if it's something like an argument that you've had with a teacher or something, or like I read one personal statement once where somebody was writing about how their teacher gave them a bad grade and they didn't think it was fair. And whilst I understood what the student was getting at, it just ended up sounding like they had a negative view of education and of their teachers. And unfortunately, it kind of just came across sort of like rude and negative and not excited and interested in the topic. In the end, we just had to remove it because we tried to edit it to make it more useful. But there was all the time we were talking about that argument he had with a teacher once. We weren't talking about how much he actually loved the subject. So it really depends on the negative experience. Did you give an example in this one? I think, that's interesting. If you're talking about mental illness or like mental well-being, it could be really interesting to include that when you're talking about medicine or pharmacy. Not in a way that's saying, I have struggled in my life, so I deserve to get something, right? I'm sure that that's not the motivation anyway. But especially in the US system, that's kind of the system, right? The more you've struggled, the more you deserve. We don't have that so much here. But talking about your struggles could be interesting if you link it to genuine academic research. So you might say, I am interested in the conflicting schools of behavioral mental well-being support, like cognitive behavioral therapy, versus medicated support. Maybe read into some conflicting statistics on those, some different schools of thought. And by linking that to your personal negative experience, you could say, having been treated within the world of mental health, mental well-being, all the way along to mental illness, mental difficulties, you could talk about how you're interested in the research and conflicts within the field. That's probably a productive way to turn that negative experience into something positive, not because it makes you sound resilient and like you've struggled, but more because it's like, well, as someone who struggled, I am interested in the new solutions that are in the field, in the innovative solutions. Maybe it's even things like alternative medicine. It's what put me in touch with that. It's honest, it's genuine, and it pushes you to talk about real, respected, interesting research rather than just, it was negative, but now I'm really resilient and I want to win. That's sort of, in this context, not, it would be fine to write, but my advice would actually be, don't just turn it into soft skills, right? We talked about soft skills, hard skills. Don't just turn it into soft skills, therefore I'm resilient, but turn it into hard skills, therefore I am interested academically in understanding this world. So that would be a fine way to turn a negative to a positive. We have another question. I don't think it matters about the capitalization. I'm going to say no. Put it in not capitalized. You can just, there we go. That's not capitalized, is it? Should be the same. Libby. You can copy and paste it. If anyone sent me an email and you want me to check if it's arrived, I will put it in the chat. Okay. We'll have another break for questions in a bit. And now we're going to think into what we would call the nitty-gritty, the very small specifics of writing sentences. So we've talked big, we've got smaller and smaller, and now I want to talk about academic writing in terms of making the sentences you've already written more, well, we're going to use the word complex, and we'll talk a bit more about what that means. If you have got a draft already written, you can, instead of the tasks I'm going to give you, you can work on your own personal statement. Otherwise, there's going to be some more writing tasks in this section to give you some practice. Okay, so this section is called Writing Complex Sentences. And I want to just pause on that word complex for a moment, if that's something you haven't really thought about the connotations of before. When I say complex, I don't mean complicated, right? A complicated sentence is a long sentence that's hard to follow, got lots of ideas in it, and it's very confusing. That's not what I mean. So not complicated sentence. Complex sentence means it contains a lot of ideas and interest, but it's really clear and engaging. It's the opposite of a boring sentence, right? It isn't a boring, simple sentence. It isn't a confusing, complicated sentence. It's right in the middle. It's complex. It's intriguing. And we're going to do some examples so that that becomes a bit more clear. But if you are using more complex sentences in your writing, in future or in the personal statement, it will help make your text more interesting to read. It will help make your text more concise, right? So not just shorter, but more densely packed with information, i.e. more information in fewer characters. And it will demonstrate clarity in your written communication. It will show that you're really good at writing in English, which is always going to be helpful. And this is going to be particularly worthwhile after your first draft. So if you've got a first draft ready, you can practice on this. If you haven't, that's fine. We'll practice now, and you can use these skills later on after a first draft. I find the reason I run this section is because often I get sent first drafts where there's some really interesting ideas, but we don't even talk about the overall flow of ideas or the content, because the first draft that I give feedback on is usually just me making their sentences more clear and more interesting. And if you can learn this skill for yourself, it will mean that you don't waste your first draft by just fixing things like grammar and word order and stuff, right? You'll do this yourself, and then when you send a first draft, we can really get into the important parts. So that first part that I said, making your text more interesting. So when you're writing, especially in the UCAS personal statement, you'll probably often find yourself using the same sentence starters over and over again. So the most commonly used things are I learnt, I think, I studied, I find this. And I see a lot of personal statements where every single sentence starts with this. And it might give a reason, right? I learnt which, I studied so. They might have some information, right? You know, we said earlier, show, don't tell. They might have done 2 thumbs up on showing, not telling, right? They've shown us a great example, but the sentence is still repetitive and boring. So the best thing you can do is vary the way you start your sentences, which will keep your reader engaged. So one way you can do this is by mixing up the clauses, right? The 2 parts of the sentence. I learned blah, blah, which blah, blah. Mixing those up a bit. Let's give an example. Here's the first sentence we're going to look at. Okay. I studied many things in physics, but the stellar body I found most interesting were pulsars because of their extreme ability to spin thousands of times per second. This is a great idea, right? They're showing their interest in physics. They are showing us that they're interested by talking about pulsars, which is showing their academic capability and their extracurricular research and maybe even further reading. So the content is great, but the sentence can be a bit boring, especially if every sentence is I studied, I think, I learned. So here's an example of mixing up the clauses. With over 1,000 revolutions per second, pulsars are one of the most extreme and fascinating stellar bodies that I have studied in physics. All I did there basically was switch the clauses. And it means this sentence is more engaging, especially in a paragraph that's listing lots of complicated ideas. I'm going to do a few more examples if that one seemed a little bit confusing. Here's another one. I don't think this is on our task. No, it's not. Here's another example. I think my time working at the dentistry practice taught me many things like organization and attention to detail. Really great stuff. We've got some soft skills and some hard skills in there. However, this is much better. Organization and attention to detail were just 2 amongst many of the soft skills I acquired during my time at the dentistry practice. You see how those clauses are just flipped? It's a really simple thing to do, but it means you don't end up with long lists of I think, I learned. Organization and attention to detail were just 2. We're straight in there with the skills. It's punchy and it's clear. I learnt in Biology AS about how mitosis can be used to replicate cells in organisms, which made me interested in biology because 330 billion cells replicate every day. Another I phrase, getting repetitive. Grasping the magnitude of human mitosis, a process that occurs 330 billion times every day, was one of the ideas that ignited my passion for biology. We flip the clauses and it's made for a really interesting sentence. In none of these have I introduced any new ideas. Most of the words are the same. I've just turned a boring, repetitive sentence into an interesting, complex sentence. Hopefully that makes sense. So this is really making your sentences more interesting to read. Another reason to write more complex sentences is to make your text more concise. You do not have a lot of characters in answer to answer these 3 questions. You've got 4,000 characters to be spread across the 3. That's not that many. And so you want your ideas to be concise, to not use loads and loads of words to explain something simple. The biggest difficulty I see in a first draft easily is students using too many sentences to make a singular point. All first drafts I receive pretty much are over length, sometimes by 2 or 3 times the amount that they should have included. And that's because they're using too many sentences just to talk about one thing. It slows down your essay, right? When you're reading it, it gets boring and slow. So it makes your reader lose interest in maybe a really interesting point that you're making. And it's using up vital characters. You don't need to use like 3 sentences to mention one bit of work experience that you did. So we're going to look at some ways to remove unnecessary phrases, as well as using the skills that we just learned, so the flipping around to make the sentence a bit more interesting, to try for some more condensed, concise sentences. So I'm going to do an example first, and then I'll give you some to do as well. So we're going to improve on this piece of text. Here it is to start with. I have been studying mathematics at school, which I enjoy because I find it really interesting. I've learned how to use complex formulas and solve difficult problems successfully in my exams. I think these skills are very important to master so that I am prepared for university. I'm looking forward to learning more about mechanics, as this is my favourite topic. Okay, this is fine. This is an example of a piece of text that I have been sent in the past. The problem with it is clear. It's got repetitive sentence starters. I think, and it's got some unnecessary phrases. They're using 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences to say realistically not that much. Yeah, they've got I have learned, I think. A lot of repetition. It's slowing down the essay. It's making me lose interest, and it's using up vital characters, right? So let's firstly remove all of those repetitive sentence starters. I have, I think, I am. So let's get rid of those. And now let's look at the ideas that remain and really think about how we can join these ideas together. And this is something you can do for your own personal statements as well. So let's condense what we've actually got when we remove all of the useless bits of information. We've got mathematics at school, that they find it interesting, complex formulas, difficult problems, that it's prepared them for university, and that overall it's their favourite topic. There's some parts we've removed that aren't included because there's a lot of words to say not much, right? Which I enjoy because I find it really. These skills are very important to master. There's a lot of words being used there and they're not working very hard. So this is those ideas reduced down into bullet points: mathematics, complex formulas, problem solving, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to give you a task now, which is to take those ideas and to turn them into one sentence. So it should be in that worksheet, but this piece that's all been crossed out here, I have reduced down the points to these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet points. I would like you to practice this skill by writing me one sentence that includes all these ideas. If you can, use what we learned earlier about flipping those clauses to make it more interesting. I'm going to give you 3 minutes, not too long, to try write one sentence. You've had about half your time. We're running out of time, so I might need to just move on. So here's my example. Yours might be a bit different, but I took this very complicated set of 4 sentences and turned it into one. Enhanced by my interest in mechanics, mathematics taught me vital formulas and fostered an appreciation for problem solving, which I'm eager to develop at university level. Well, first of all, as I said there, it makes it sound more sophisticated straight away, much more sophisticated than the first draft. Second of all, it uses fewer words to say the same amount of things about your interest in maths. And finally, it links those ideas together more clearly. It tells a story about how mechanics taught formulas, and then that will be developed at university level. We've only used 140 characters. I can't remember how many I put in the first. How many characters is that? Oh, maybe I didn't add it. But the characters number is reduced, so you can move on to the next thing without having used up hundreds of characters. I'm going to give you some examples to try on your own now, and there's some connectives as sentence starters if those help. I would like you to consider the next 4 sentences here that I'm going to give you, and do your best to do what I did. Condense them into 1 or 2 sentences using more complex clauses. I put causes, I should say clauses. So do what I did, remove the unnecessary stuff, take the ideas and rewrite them using more interesting sentences, maybe with some of these connectives. Okay, I have been learning psychology at A2 level, where we have recently been focusing on animal conditioning. I found this very interesting, and I also managed to apply this to some real-world work experience. I also did some brief work with the RSPCA, where I had many responsibilities. I now feel like I understand the needs of animals better and could keep them calm from the work that I did during this time. So take those and do that process yourself. So hopefully by now you've had a look at this paragraph, you've removed the sentence starters, you've condensed the ideas, and hopefully now you are writing a sentence that combines all of them. I'll give you another minute. Here's my example. So I took that same piece of text, I removed I have been, I found this, I also did, I now feel like. I removed any of the useless phrases, just I found this very interesting, where I had many responsibilities, and turned it into one interesting and concise sentence. From the RSPCA, I learnt to read the signs of stress in the animals and was able to calm them through the practical application of what I had learnt about conditioning. I might put what I'd learnt about conditioning in A2 psychology, but you see how this has made it more interesting to read and also reduced the character count significantly? Sometimes it can feel that, like, if you're writing more, you're writing better, right? Especially in a first draft, you just want to put everything down and you're like, yes, I've written 1,000 words, I must be so clever. But actually we need to keep it condensed, keep it concise, and make it interesting to read. Okay, here's another example. We've got 5 minutes to go today, so I'm just going to give you, this one more, and I'll give you 2 minutes to try the same with this one. Okay, so step 1, remove the repetitive sentence starters. Step 2, remove the useless information that isn't telling us anything interesting. And then step 3 is to take the distilled ideas and reformulate them into 1 or 2 sentences. During my time at Boots Pharmacy, I applied my knowledge of organic synthesis by identifying underlying ingredients in the prescriptions. As a result, I became fascinated by the variety of different drugs that can be made with only minor changes in a formula. And these were all examples of personal statements that I have had in the past, where they explain really great work experience like this. They've managed to work at a pharmacy, and it actually connected with their chemistry studies, but the sentences they gave were long and repetitive. They used a lot of characters and they weren't very interesting. What I've done here is made it a lot more readable, right, and interesting. So I've argued here that writing more complex sentences, doing that extra bit of work on what you have already written, makes your sentences more interesting to read. It makes them more clear and it makes them more concise. And so what I'd really recommend that you do after your first draft is do that same process as we just did for your own writing. Be critical. Where have you repeated yourself? Where are you using boring, repetitive sentence structures? And how could you condense that information and make it more interesting? So I've included those 3 tips there that you should consider when you're looking at your first draft. The 3 tips are to replace repetitive sentence starters, to vary how cause and effect, right, clause 1 and clause 2 are shown in your writing, and to look into innovative punctuation to join your ideas together. And hopefully it will mean that after you've written a long, long draft of thousands of characters, you can be critical of yourself and give yourself a first redraft before you need to worry about giving it back to your teachers or to Suno or to me to review that personal statement. Okay, I think that's everything considered. Let's have a look at the questions just in case there is anything. Sorry, I've got them on my phone. Yeah, I think we've covered all the questions in there. If anyone has a final one, you can drop it in the Zoom chat now. Otherwise, I've got some information here. My email address I've already given you. If you need any help in the early stages with brainstorming, deciding what to write, or any help right at the end, just proofreading, right? Or anywhere in the middle, if you want some help with flow or ideas, you can send me an email. Same, but I'm also happy to help with English language stuff as well if you're struggling with writing in English or preparing for an interview in English and you just want like a little quick English language class. I can also help you with that stuff as well. Is there anything else that we need to cover today? No? I will stop sharing my screen, I think. Oh, I've got a question. Yeah, I can see your question. Just send it on through. Is there a second half to that question, Dana? Oh yeah, hard essay and concise words that I can use. Is okay. Hard and concise words that I can use in my essay. Do you mean like specialized vocabulary? Because I think that is worthwhile doing. So yeah, so I gave some examples of good sentence starters, which can be used for anyone. Specialist vocabulary would be fantastic. I would say refer to what is in your A-levels or whatever you're studying, IB right now, and use some of the key terms that are in especially the most advanced topics. You can also use that secondary reading that I've suggested, going to journals and stuff to find out what those words are, providing that you feel confident using them. And the third one would be, as well as giving your personal statement to me or other university application specialists, give your personal statement to your subject tutor, right? If you're studying biology, I'm happy to read it. I can see what's on the page and help you with the wording. But if you give it to your biology teacher, they will be able to say, actually, that's a bit wrong. You should use this word. This will make it sound a bit more interesting. So my advice would be consider talking to your subject teachers as well as your university advisors. Anything else? If there is anything else, because we're out of time now, you can send me a question to my email anytime. No problem. We can send me questions to my email. That's absolutely fine. And if we have a meeting, I can also talk to you in a bit more length as well, more personally about your own topics. Same for writing. You can just email me. Right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Yeah, I think we're done for the day. I don't have to stop the recording. Or do I still have that? Stopping. Sorry, I'm just now working out how to stop this recording so I don't cancel the meeting. First of all, I don't know if anybody got any of their results this week, but if you did, then I hope that they went well, and that they represented how hard that you probably worked for them. Some people are maybe looking forward to that date in the future. But a lot of the A-level results in the UK were released this week, so pretty much everybody who goes to school in England found out what university they were going to just this week. So it's an exciting time of year. So today we're going to be talking a bit more about academic writing. So last time it was more about what the personal statement is, what you need to talk about. And this week, I really want to give you some tips on how to write better, right? How to write better sentences, paragraphs, better arguments. That's going to be the general gist. So last week, to recap, we looked at that whole UCAS application process. And some of the things I recommended that if you haven't had a look at, I'd love for you to look at again, are those subject tasters on the website, the chance to chat to existing students. You can filter by country of origin or by subject, and the application portal. If you're planning on starting your application, or even if you're already doing it, make sure you look at all three things. We looked at the new 3 UCAS entrance questions, which are fairly simple questions. They're things that are covering your motivation into the topic, your knowledge about it, your capability. We looked at form versus content. That was that idea of the vase and the water, the idea that your thoughts, your arguments can be fantastic, but if they're not formed properly, structured, written in clear, plain English, then it can make even the best experience not look as strong. And we finished with a note on secondary reading, which we're going to be picking up on today. So today we're going to begin with a moment on LLM, so large language models like ChatGPT, just very briefly, because I get a lot of questions about it. And then we're going to consider introducing yourself. So that used to be an introduction, now it's just question 1. And think really about that very first sentence of your very first question. We're going to practice a method we call show, don't tell. And we're going to return to the secondary reading task that I left you with last time when I asked you to go and find a little piece of further reading about your topic. Again, I've got the questions. Let me just check. I think this is the same. I'm going to scan this again. I think this is the same sheet as last time. We'll just continue on the same table. Oh, that's the worksheet. Have I done the wrong way around? If you've got that question document, I'll send it to the chat otherwise, because it's sending me to the worksheet. But I'll pause throughout. If it's not up, I'll just take questions in the Zoom chat box. And same as last time, can you have somewhere to write your ideas? So whether that's on pen and paper, that's what I like to do because I like to cross things out. Or if you want to use the worksheet that I've left there, you absolutely can. That will have all the questions from the PowerPoint on the worksheet. Okay. So before we actually start, I just wanted to take a moment on considering large-scale generative AI models. Obviously, the most common one is ChatGPT right now. And this is a question I get asked a lot, not just in university applications, but when I'm teaching essay subjects like English literature, all of that stuff. It's really quite a new problem. It's only really been in the last couple of years that these models have even been advanced enough that it could be a conversation worth having, right? And it's also very, very new to universities. And it's difficult to know the extent to which it's okay to use them, right? So I get asked a few questions about these. First one being, will anybody know if I've written my personal statement using ChatGPT? And can you tell when something's written by AI? And my answers to those are going to be fairly vague, unfortunately. We don't know if anybody would know if something was written by AI. I will say, when people put a basic prompt into something like ChatGPT and send me something, I can tell, because you may or may not know this, but ChatGPT has a very specific tone. It almost puts its own personality, very agreeable personality, into the text. And when prompts are too basic, yeah, I can tell that it's been written by an AI. There are a few little markers that you can often tell, clauses, the way that it uses language. You can sometimes tell. Whether your admissions tutor will be able to tell, I don't know. And that is why I would say try not to use it, especially for full, long sentences, because if you were to be found out as having used it, it will be considered plagiarism, which, as we know, is very serious accusation in the academic world. So it's a big risk, right, using it. Even if you think that they won't know, how can we tell whether or not they will, and can we tell if in the future we don't have better technology to trace it? There's also, is it okay ethically? Have a think in yourself. I can't answer that question for you. If someone were to get a space at university because they had used a language model like ChatGPT to just put it in the prompt box and it secures them a spot at Oxford, how would you feel about the ethics of that? You know, if someone got a place over you at that university. I personally struggle a bit with the ethics. It's something you have to consider for yourself. Some of the advice on UCAS personal statements suggests you can use ChatGPT just for planning, right? Just for structure. So you can put the prompt in to say, give me an outline, and then you promise yourself, I will write the real words, but I will just ask it for an outline. That's what the UCAS guidance says. You can use it for planning, but not for writing. Similarly, people say, what about if I just use it for grammar at the end? I'll write it myself, but I'll just use ChatGPT to check the grammar. I would say both of these things, using it for planning, using it for grammar, can also be problematic. Because as soon as you see what ChatGPT wants to improve upon, it's very, very difficult not to just copy and paste it. Very, very difficult. It's the same for me. I have a note there. How can I resist the temptation? As someone who has done a lot of academic writing, written long dissertations for my master's degree, some days are really hard. Sometimes it's really, really hard to write. And it's very tempting just to put it in ChatGPT, press enter, and it writes it for you, and you can just tweak it. But you have to keep in mind the answers to those other questions. What if somebody is able to find out? What if somehow the model, you know, there's thousands of people applying for universities. It might be that there's set phrases that the tutors see again and again. They see the same phrase being used in multiple applications. They might know that all of those students have been using the same AI model. So my overall point, I guess, is I know it's very difficult to resist the temptation to stick these questions into ChatGPT and ask it just to tweak it for your experience, but please try and avoid it. I don't want anybody to be found out, and I want you to consider the ethics of whether it's the right thing to do. Very complicated. A lot of people say this is just the way things are going now, right? In 10 years, maybe they won't mind. But in 10 years, they might also have better technology to find out who has just been plugging these questions into AI. So whilst the UCAS guidance says you can use it for planning, but nothing else, my personal advice to avoid temptation is to avoid it entirely. I know it isn't very nice to hear, but it's too tempting just to copy and paste. I get tempted just to copy and paste what it says, because as soon as it gives you an answer, you think, oh, that's good, actually, I will use that. You don't want to end up with the same personal statement as someone else. You don't want to lose all your hard work from your A-levels just to have an easy answer to a few questions. Okay, that is the note on ChatGPT over. We can have more of a discussion about it at the end if we have some time. Okay, so last week we looked at the content of your personal statement. For me, I separate it into these 4 boxes because it's a good way to see how they link. Motivation, classwork, reading and research or secondary reading, and your relevant experience. And this we saw linked to the 3 questions that are in the UCAS application. Number 1, why do you want to study this course or subject? Number 2, how have your qualifications and studies helped you to prepare for this course or subject? Number 3, what else have you done to prepare outside of education, and why are these experiences useful? These are your questions that you will be answering. And my job today is to make sure that the way you answer these questions is as strong and clear as possible. So we're just going to start at the beginning and think about introducing yourself in that very first question. Question 1 is the admissions tutor's first chance, right, to understand the applicant that you are. In many ways, question 1 is just like an essay, like in a full essay, where you have an introduction at the beginning, where you introduce the topic. That's really what question 1 is doing, right, when it asks you, why do you want to study this topic? And just like in an essay with an introduction, you need a strong first sentence to hook in your reader and to show, as we saw, your motivation, your academic capability, and your personal interest. So we're talking now about the very first question and the very first sentence. So let's just start by focusing, well, on the answer to that simple question and expanding on the phrase, I want to study this course because. Here's an example, right, where we've just literally started with the phrase, I want to study this course because further study of the English language would fuel my interest and genuine curiosity of language and assist my reflection, and it goes on. I'd like you to, on your worksheets or on your piece of paper, really just go for a simple answer, a simple expansion on I want to study this course because. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. Get your piece of paper out, write anything from 5 words to 15 words. I want to study this course because. I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. Okay. So some of you might have gone the complicated route with an answer a bit more like this. Some of you may have gone for a more simple route. I want to study this course because it's my dream to be a doctor. I want to study this course because I am interested in architecture. All of that's fine for now. Just make sure you've got something on the page. So a more nuanced response, so more focused on you and your own characteristics, will actually answer this question by showing the reader, right? So not just, I want to study this course because I want to be a doctor, I am interested in this subject, but showing the reader by considering something more personal. So for some examples that I've put on here are a belief, an interest, a memory, or their personal understanding of the topic. And I think we'll go through a few of those now. Let's go through some of these examples. So keep those in mind. Something you believe about the subject, an interest that you have in the subject, a memory you have about it, or maybe giving your own definition. We've got some examples coming up, and I will read through them because I think it can be quite helpful. So this is an example of, I want to say this is aeronautics. Right. Man-made birds of the 21st century move through the air, enormous lumps of metal 200,000 times heavier than seagulls that inspired the idea. How? It's all down to today's engineers, who have developed the fundamental ideas of flight first put forward by the Wright brothers in 1903. At the age of 13, RAF air cadets left me longing for the next lesson to find out how powered flight has led to the luxuries we have today: rapid international delivery, worldwide flights to holiday destinations, quick response emergency air services, and of course, the use of flight in military defence. It is the impact of flight that fueled my natural curiosity and desire to study aeronautics. So in this question, instead of just saying, I want to study this course because of air cadets or because I'm interested in the Wright brothers, they have taken all of those things, their belief, their interest, their memories, and blended it together to give us a great answer to question 1. Here are some tips from the UCAS website, which I think can be fairly useful. They're just from admissions tutors, so it's not the official guidance, it's just some opinions that the admissions tutors have. A lot of them are talking about getting started, jumping straight in, right? We've got go straight in, be specific from line 1, captures the reason you're interested. I think it's pretty generic advice, but it's worth considering that you, from question 1, want to get straight into the topic that you are hoping to study at university. What you want to avoid is the cliched first line. And every year, UCAS updates a list of the most commonly used first line in the personal statements. That's changed a bit now because of the 3-question process, but it's still the same idea. The first sentence is so difficult that it means people often use cliche. 1,779 candidates used the phrase, from a young age, I have always been interested in or fascinated by. Nearly 2,000 candidates last year used that same starter. And it means as an admission tutor, as soon as you read it, it doesn't sound unique and it doesn't sound realistic. Same for as long as I remember I have been fascinated by, or for as long as I can remember I have, whatever, been interested to. It goes without saying, really, you don't want to just have the same line as everybody else applying. So definitely try not to use any of these lines in your first question. And finally, don't begin with a quotation either. I've read a few personal statements that the very first character in it is a quotation mark, and then they give me a quote. You want to start with your own words. So note these down as things not to use. Some ideas you can try for your very first sentence in your very first question are, number one, to define the need for the subject. So by that I mean tell the admissions tutor why your topic is so important, why it's vital for human health or the planet's health, whatever it is. Define the need for the subject. Here are 3 examples of that. I'll read the literature one. So this student has defined the reason for literature existing at university because literature is a way to express, escape and enjoy. It is an integral part of all cultures, the epitome of what language is supposed to be. And I'll read the third one. Human experience reveals that everything is governed by systems. We observe that nature, for example, follows its own procedures. Without them, it would collapse. I have noticed that the law is equally essential to human existence. So in all of these examples, the student is taking their subject and telling us why that subject is important. So that's one thing that you can try. The next idea to try is qualify your interest in the subject. Okay, some examples. Picking apart game files and understanding their composition was an enjoyable way to spend my time while growing up. It ended being something I spent an extensive amount of time on. My experience of shadowing a community pharmacist was a watershed in which I realised the full extent of roles in this profession in its setting. So both of these are talking about why you're interested in the subject. Both of them are also using an example, an experience that they've had. A third idea to try would be to consider a contemporary development. So that means like a new development, something happening right now in the field. Recently, while reading a BBC News article, something caught my attention. A clinical trial investigating aspirin's effect on preventing the relapse of cancer in humans. The drug works by making the platelets less sticky. By reducing the platelet stickiness, aspirin makes it harder for them to carry and distribute the cancer cells. So in this one, we're seeing that the student has done some research. They're clearly interested in it outside of the classroom. And they're telling us why this field, why they're interested in the new developments in this area. So there's those 3 that I've just mentioned. Number 1, defining the need for the subject. Number 2, qualifying your interest in the subject. Number 3, thinking of a contemporary development. And I want to give you, I think actually a full, maybe 3 minutes per question. So I might give you a full 9-10 minutes to write an answer for every single one of these as it relates to your subject. So define the need for it, qualify your interest in it, and consider something new in that field. Obviously, ideally, I'd like to be able to review some of your answers. We might have time at the end to do so. But if you try these 3 sentences, you'll finish today's session with 3 potential first sentences, which is a great thing to have by the end of the day. So I'm going to set a timer. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do this whole task. I'm just sending them to the chat as well. had about 3 minutes now, so you should be finishing off your sentence for the first question. Okay, hopefully now you've done 2 of them. You defined your need for the subject and you've qualified your interest in the subject. You should be finishing now, getting on to the last one, the third part. Okay, I'm a bit conscious of time, so I might have to get us to wrap up that task now. Hopefully you've had time to do at least 2 of those, maybe 3. If you have managed to write a sentence for all 3 of those questions, first of all, you might have the sentence you'll end up using in your first question. You might even, combining them, have the answer to your first question drafted right now. So it is worth following along if I do a task, because you might end up with even just a sentence that you can use for your application. I think I'm still sharing. Yes, I am. Let's keep going, shall we? Yeah, I'm still sharing. Okay. So one of the themes that we had when we're talking about that first sentence is this idea of show, don't tell. Right? So in that question there, we started with a sentence that said, I want to study this course because, and you might have written, I'm interested in learning more about the Neolithic period. That's telling somebody why you're interested. When we're showing somebody, we're giving a belief, an interest, any of those things that we just wrote to express our interest in a topic. And this is going to be the case for all three of your questions, and actually all personal writing in the future when you're writing cover letters or when you're in an interview. In all of these instances, you want to try and show them your interest in a topic or a job, whatever it is, rather than just telling them. So here's an example. You could tell somebody, I am a great team player. But an improvement on this is to show them you're a great team player. While organising a charity event with 6 peers, I coordinated logistics and delegated roles, which raised £500 for our local hospice. So why is it better, the second phrase? Well, number one, it's more convincing. It sounds more true, right? Because you've given a real example. Anybody they can say, I'm a great team player, but by giving an example, showing us you're a great team player, it sounds more convincing, more true. It's more personal. The first one is a stock phrase that anybody could say. The second one is more about your experience. It paints a picture about you as an individual. It's more memorable. It's different from what everybody else will be writing. So it sets you apart and maybe sticks in the admissions tutor's head. And it also provides a subset or an extra set of soft skills. They're talking about organisation. They're talking about coordination. And they're talking about philanthropy, right? Raising money for charity. So there's extra skills that have been included there, as well as teamwork. And it's a really useful skill to have when you're writing. It's something I see in personal statements all the time when students just write, I am good at this, I can do this. And I want to tell them, just show me with an example, especially something evidence-based, or even your feelings or motivations, not just telling me. So our next task, and there is going to be more tasks today rather than just me lecturing you, is to replace these generic claims with specific evidence-based examples. If you can use your own experience, that's even better. If you can't, it can just be a practice. So I'd like you to pick one of each of these. So either question 1 or 2 in soft skills and 1 or 2 on hard skills. So you should do 1 hard skill, 1 soft skill. So our generic statements are, I am hardworking and determined. I am confident in international environments. And hard skills, I enjoy, for example, coding. I am top of my specific class. These may all be true, right? You may be confident in international environments, but you can't just say it. Show it. Tell us. So I'm going to give you another 5 minutes now to do any two of these, to take the generic claim and to show us why it's true. If you're struggling, look at that note on the bottom. It says, be specific. Think about what you did, where, when, why. All of the who, what, where, when, why questions. I'll give you another minute, so if you're still writing, just keep going. If you're struggling, just try and think of an example of, a time in your life that you showed you were hardworking and determined. And just write it down. It doesn't need to be perfect. Okay. We'll pause now for some questions. I'm going to check the document. I don't think if there's anyone who's got any questions, you can pop it in the document. You can pop up on the chat if you'd like. Okay. To be honest, there's not a lot to talk about so far, right? What we've done so far is we've just talked about the first sentence, things that you could mention, and then this skill of showing rather than telling. So there might not be too many questions about that, but if there are, we can continue with them at the end. Let me just decide when a good time for our break is. Secondary sources. Yeah, let's have a break after we've talked about secondary sources. So that'll be in about another 10 minutes. Okay, so as always, any questions, pop them in the doc, and I'll review them every 10 minutes or so. Hopefully you've got some things written down. If you're very lucky, you'll have some stuff that you'll actually be using in your personal statement today. Okay, using secondary sources. This is what we're drawing on from last week. Let me actually just show you. Go back to this one here. We mentioned this last week in that section, reading and research. And the reason I include reading and research is because it fills both of those two boxes for question 1 and question 3. Because it shows for question 1 why you're interested in a topic, right? Show, don't tell. You can show your interest in a topic by saying, I've been reading this about the topic. I've been looking at the news. And for question 3, it also shows that you do work outside of the classroom. So it's really useful to consider wider reading, research, secondary reading, whatever you want to call it, because you can use it in almost every question, and you can use it instead of something like work experience or internships. If you don't have that stuff, this is a great way to do it for free or more easily, because you don't need to organize a really fancy internship. You can just read some books. So the idea of secondary sources, or what we're calling wider reading, right? A secondary source is any piece of somebody else's research you are using. So when you're at university, some of you will be using them already. When you're at university, you'll be consistently expected to use a number of secondary sources in no matter what subject you choose. So whether you're in the humanities, whether you're in the sciences, you will be using other people's research at times. So the first example of that is through studies. Here's a quotation that you might, for instance, use in an essay. All three of these, by the way, are using the same example. So the first one is citing, quoting a study. David Crystal's 2004 study explores the imperial power of dominant languages which render powerless the social memory of an endangered language. That's an example of showing a academic's study in your writing. Another way to use a secondary source is by quoting them. According to Crystal, in his study of endangered languages, the world is facing a linguistic crisis of unprecedented scale, right? That's using somebody else's study, and it's using their words in your text. The third way you'll see secondary sources is through statistics, right? Numbers and studies on specific populations. Crystal structures his research around the importance of preserving the 96% of the world's languages which are spoken by just 4% of the population. We're taking the statistics that somebody else has explored and using them in our research, right? You haven't found those statistics yourself, you're borrowing them from someone else. This is a huge part of university study, reading other people's work and understanding why it's important, and using it to boost your own research. What's really important when you're at university is that we always accurately footnote and reference them. Some of you will be doing that already if you do an essay subject. Not everyone will. The great news about your personal statement in those 3 questions, you do not need to footnote, you do not need to reference. They're just an opportunity. So in future, you really need to consider these different ways of structuring your answers to make sure you're always including the original academic in it. But today, you don't need to worry about it. You can just use them as wider reading, right? To show that you are reading around the subject. Why? Well, I've told you, because it can be a great way to show your motivation, to show your academic capability, and show your extracurricular commitment. It tells the admissions tutor a lot about you, right? That you're enthusiastic, that you're clever, that you're hardworking. So what I would say first is, I've made it sound pretty great, but please do not use wider reading in your UCAS personal statement if you're not actually interested in it. If I'm forcing you to do extra reading that you don't really want to do, that you just find boring, don't use it, because they will find out in the interview, if you get one, that you don't actually care about it. So don't fake your interest, just try and search for interest. If you're just ticking a box, do not use it. If you just are doing it because I'm telling you, then don't do it if that's the only reason. And don't do it just because it sounds clever. I've read people's English literature personal statements where they say that they've read a Shakespeare play. And I can tell that they haven't really read a Shakespeare play. Usually that's the point, is because you go and see it at the theatre, but that's by the by. They're just putting it in because it sounds clever, actually, it's only worth putting in if you genuinely love that Shakespeare play. And please do not use secondary resources as wider reading if you can't actually talk at length about it. If I asked you a question about that reading, could you give me a good answer? Could you expand on it and show that you understand? Because if you put secondary reading in your UCAS personal statement and then you get an interview, especially for Oxford, Cambridge, medicine, they will ask you about it. They will check that you didn't just put it in there to tick a box or to sound clever. They will check. So make sure you're genuinely interested in what we're doing right now. And if you're not, just ignore it. It's better to actually be passionate about it. That said, do use wider reading as a way to show your interest outside of school. You're not just like everybody else who only does their classwork. You are doing extra hard work, which makes you an extra attractive student. Do use it to prove that you are ready to learn cutting edge research. So it shows that you want to learn the new stuff, not the stuff that was printed in your book 10 years ago in your textbook at school. You want to know what's happening right now. Do use it in a way that complements your motivations. If you've told them that you are motivated by, it's your dream to work on a drug that cures heart disease, well, you can show your wider reading around heart disease to say, here's my motivation. I have always wanted to learn, to be part of a team that works on heart disease, and here's what that research looks like right now. And to tie together your passions. If you're fortunate enough, you might have multiple interests that blend. I mean, it's kind of, might be rare at this stage, but you might have, let's say you want to study medicine again, and you play the flute. You might look at the research. I don't know if you've all seen it, but it's quite a famous video, right, of the man playing the flute while he's having brain surgery, because the doctors could see that his brain was still working, right, in the background. So you might research that secondary reading to tie together your interest in surgery and in music. It can be a really innovative way to blend your passions. Here is an example, the first example we have. I developed my interest in biomedical engineering by watching a TED Talk by Hugh Hare titled New Bionics Let Us Run, Climb and Dance. I realised that the use of bionics could not just give back the ability to perform fundamental functions such as walking, but it also allows for the use of going beyond the basics. For example, relearning a particular passion such as dancing, ice skating, or even ice hockey. I won't read this whole one, but this student has read a book called Bad Science about anti-aging creams and active ingredients, as well as ethics, which I'll leave up here if you want to read. This shows us that they are reading around the topic. They aren't just doing what is in their class. And we've got some specific academic hard skills in here, right? They're talking about calcium channel blockers used to treat angina and hypertension. So they're showing us that they have a capability in the topic as well. And that's all been a springboard from the piece of reading, the book that they've done their reading on. So we've got another task now. This is the last task before we have a break. So just keep going for now, and we'll have a break probably in about 10 minutes. This task will take about 10 minutes, I think. So you should have, oh, that says from yesterday. I didn't mean yesterday, I meant last week. Have a look from last week. There you go. Take a look at the homework that I set for you last week, which was to go and research one of those sites. So that the easier ones were things like TED Talks. I also put the BBC Sounds on there. We had Nature, the National Geographic. Hopefully all of you went away and found something relevant to your course. Take some time to remind yourself of what you learnt in that. And I'd like you to summarize the piece in 1 or 2 sentences. This should be on your worksheet. So take 1 or 2 sentences to summarize the entirety of the article that you read. It should be possible. I mean, most of you will have done summary practices, you know, like GCSE. Similar to that, just take a whole piece of text, get it into 1 or 2 sentences. I'm going to leave you to do that first for 5 minutes. And then I'm going to set you another task to link it to the personal statement. If you haven't done this task, if you have, don't worry about this. If you haven't done this task, please spend this time now to go to Nature, or where are the examples that I gave you? Let's open up my other ones. We had Nature, National Geographic, BBC News. The more challenging ones were going to things like JSTOR or Google Scholar. Can you see this? Oops. I'm just going to share my entire screen for a moment. If you haven't already done it, which I'm hoping you have, if you haven't, use this 5 minutes to go to one of these websites now and have a look. Okay, hopefully you reminded yourself of it and maybe just written some notes, 1 or 2 sentences to summarize what it was about. This is when it's a bit of a shame that we've not got this workshop in person, because it can be really useful to just explain to your peers something complicated as a way to show your understanding of it. If you have the chance in a study group or with your family to explain the article you found to them, you might find that it's really useful, especially if they're interested in it. But now let's take that article and make it usable for the UCAS personal statement. So in order to do that, I'd like you to use your article to answer any two at all of these questions. What does it show you that you hadn't already considered? What new ideas has this research brought to the field? Why is this important? Do you have a personal connection to this story? What can the history of this topic tell us about today? Do you disagree with anything about the topic? So these are starter questions to give you something to think about. And I'd like you to pick out 2 of these that interest you the most and write a quick answer. Doesn't need to be a long sentence, just a quick answer to these questions relating to the article. And hopefully it will give you some inspiration to write some great paragraphs on your secondary reading. So I'm going to give you another 5 minutes now. Maybe only 4. I don't need you to write a full sentence for this. Just, think about the answers to them, make some notes. If you, again, aren't following along with the homework and you're just having a look at some of those journals that I sent you, think about these questions in relation to the articles you're seeing on the page right now. But this will be even more useful if you have actually found an article that you're interested in. And I'll stop you in another 4 minutes. Got about a minute to go on this task. Okay, I think we are, oh, let me just finish off this last slide and then we can have a little break. So I've just summarized the use of secondary sources here, and how you can use it in all three of the questions. So in question 1, you could link it into your motivation. So the example we have here is, my interest in politics at large narrowed to a more focused obsession with international organisations when I read a recent article from the WHO regarding our social responsibility to refugees during the pandemic in its relation to the global vaccination programme. So that shows a question to the answer, an answer to the question, why do you want to study this course, right? They've shown their motivation using a secondary piece of research. For question 2, you can link it to your study. Following on from the study of use in art in therapy for children in my AS psychology, I became fascinated in researching the humanistic approach, the practice described by Dr. Barbara Jones in her article, Trauma and the Creative Approach to Emotional Repair. This paper intrigued me because ... So that's linking it to your academic study. Or you could use it in question 3 to link it to your extra interests, especially if there's an ambition for the future. As cutting-edge research resolved, Professor Edward Nairn claims that genetic modification will be the key to survival in 90% of species on Earth. And it is with this ambition that I choose to pursue a career in bioengineering. So here's how we can use secondary sources in the 3 different questions. You wouldn't need to use it in all 3. You don't need to use it in any. But depending on what your article has said, you might think that it's more suitable for one of these 3 different questions. Totally up to you. But I would really recommend using it in at least one of your questions if you have a genuine interest in it. Okay, we have reached about an hour. So unless we've got any questions right now, I'm happy to have a little break. I'm not seeing any new questions on the doc. You can add them if you have them, or I'll just answer them when we get back. Yep, okay. Let's have then, how long should we have as a break? What do you think? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? I'll just say 10 minutes. And when we get back, we'll be talking about writing more interesting sentences. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop recording. If during this break anybody would like to, I will be in the meeting and I'm sending my email address. I know we've done a lot of writing tasks so far. If you would like me to review some of your work, I'll stop sharing my screen. If you would like me to review some of your work, then I'd be happy to mark any of the work that you've done so far on your worksheets. You can send it to my email address and I will give you some feedback, some written feedback. I think I need to pause the recording. Okay, I can't pause the recording. I'll just turn off mic and camera, and I'll see you in 10 minutes, unless anybody wants some extra feedback in the meantime.